Welcome, everyone, to this YouTube exclusive video for the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, and I will be going over the top veteran defensive players who won or lost value coming out of the NFL draft. So basically our non-rookie risers and fallers that will have to adjust expectations for this season, specifically as we prep for who will and won't be fantasy relevant for us in 2025. So let's get right into it, starting with our winners or risers, however you want to describe them. These are the names that I'm viewing as our top beneficiaries, with each player's NFL team not spending significant draft capital on another player at the position when it seemed possible or even necessary to do so. Starting with linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts, Jaylen Carlys. So the Colts lost EJ Speed to free agency this offseason and were commonly mocked, a linebacker within the first 3 rounds in a lot of consensus mock drafts, what I saw, which would have been a pretty significant blow to Carlys as the next man up in Lou Anarumo's defense. Fortunately, for anyone who was able to get in on Carlys as early on in this offseason, as we suggested in our linebackers to target article from back in, I think it was January, Carlys dodged basically all the bullets that the NFL draft could possibly throw at him because the Colts did not address the position at all through 7 rounds, and they didn't do it in free agency either. So now you have Jaylen Carlys, who only has 242 defensive snaps and 1 full-time start to his name in his NFL career, though he did perform relatively well in his rookie season last year, specifically in coverage. He earned a pretty strong 83.1 coverage grade. And in his 1 full-time start last year, he led the team in total tackles with 10, which again, it isn't an indication of how he would produce across an entire season, but what'll help him get there is that new defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo at least does tend to deploy 2 full-time linebackers. So Carlys could carry that potential on a weekly basis along with Zaire Franklin. So still plenty of offseason remaining for all of these kind of borderline NFL starters that I'll talk about today, where they can be replaced at any point. But as of right now, Carlys is in a great position to be IDP relevant in most formats, and on Sleeper, where he has DB eligibility as well. He needs to at least be rostered in all of those leagues right now because there's significant upside there with that potential cheat code. Next up, another linebacker whose team really felt like they could start looking to the future a bit more. I'm talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Anthony Walker Jr. in particular. And the reason that he's considered as a winner is that Walker, his status as an NFL starter has been somewhat flimsy in recent years, mostly due to like having multiple injuries, which just kind of kept him in and out of the lineup. But Tampa Bay really felt like a prime landing spot for a young rookie linebacker to get drafted, considering Walker's injury history, but also Lavonte David nearing the end of his NFL career as well. But the team didn't draft a single player at the position, which it seems to indicate that they're confident in their 2 NFL veterans to man that defense in 2025, both of whom are capable of playing full-time snaps as well. So I'm a bit surprised that they didn't look for at least some more depth there, considering, again, Walker isn't one of the league's top linebackers, but he is at least one of the more experienced ones after having played 4,200 defensive snaps in his NFL career, which is almost always something that coaches will value above all else. So in Walker's case, since the team doesn't really have like a younger incumbent that he'll have to look over his shoulder for, he's in a pretty comfortable spot to play significant snaps this season. He isn't going to be anything more than like an LB3 at best for IDP purposes, but is likely to be one of those kind of overlooked starters this offseason that, dynasty managers and 2025 drafters should be able to acquire for little to no cost at this point. Okay, let's move away from the linebackers for a sec and talk about a safety winner. And one of the bigger ones, in my opinion, is Will Harris of the Washington Commanders. So Jeremy Chin departed in free agency. Dan Quinn, because of that, he lost a key player and a key role in his defense, as his strong safety really spends an above average amount of time around the line of scrimmage so that he can act as that second linebacker, which will give Frankie Louvu more time to spend on the edge, right, where he can be really effective. So there were, I think, several options in the NFL draft that Dan Quinn could have targeted to fill that role. I would have loved if this was Nick Emanwari, but it just never happened, which seems to imply that either Will Harris or Quan Martin, formerly known as Jartavius Martin, will be in for a prime IDP role in 2025. There is one other unlikely option, in undrafted free agent Trey Rucker out of Oklahoma State, who spent like 40% of his college snaps lined up in the box. But again, undrafted rookie, he would need a lot of help to get into that role. So I think the advantage right now for somebody like Will Harris is that he has the size, he has experience playing close to the line of scrimmage, where remember that, Quan Martin, he was Dan Quinn's deep safety last year. He played 75% of his snaps from a deep alignment. That's a pretty high mark. So for me, Harris might be the more likely candidate to bet on for IDP purposes, though it's not impossible that Martin gets that role as well. For me, though, Harris should be the top target for IDP managers, expecting around 40% of his snaps in the box after Jeremy Chin was at like 50% last season. So he's going to be super cheap in drafts this year and could be primed for excellent tackle production for the position. So keep him in mind late in your drafts. I love these kind of guys, these kind of value guys, and he's in a good spot to be one of them this year. All right, back to the linebackers, because I know that is the position that people care most about. And I want to highlight Troy Reeder, because heading into this offseason and even coming out of free agency, the Rams were arguably the most linebacker needy team in the league, with a core of just Troy Reeder, obviously, Omar Spates, and Nate Landman, all of them former UDFAs with little starting NFL experience. For Reeder, I think for the Rams, really, the potential for them to land like a starting quality linebacker in this draft was pretty high, but they waited until round 5 to address the position, which, as much as I like Chris Paul, considering the draft capital, he's more likely to be, I think, problematic for like Omar Spates and or Nate Landman than Reeder at this point, considering that Reeder's experience in this defense, he has experience in this defense as a starter. So he started for the Rams multiple times, multiple seasons, including the playoff games, which I think is going to make him the heavy favorite in this group to have that LB1 role for them come week 1 and likely through the year, assuming they don't add significant competition. So the other thing to keep in mind is that the second linebacker for the role for the Rams is not typically a full-time role, so not one that'll be IDP relevant in like shallower formats. And considering the lack of experience of everyone on that roster vying for that role, it's not necessarily a situation worth planting a flag on or becoming overly invested in at this point in the offseason. But that's, not really as much of a concern with Reeder, who should be the lone weekly full-time option as long as he's healthy. So another guy that, should come with an ideal discount this offseason and worth targeting. Okay, last one I want to highlight as far as winners here, the Las Vegas Raiders linebackers as a whole, really, and I guess specifically Devin White, who figures to be the 3-down linebacker here right now. And I think you can make the argument that outside of the Rams, the Raiders were likely the next most linebacker needy defense this offseason, having lost both of their 2024 starters, Robert Spillane and Divine Diablo, in free agency, with no clear replacements in place via like past drafts or anything like that. And then just Devin White and Landon Roberts in place as their current projected starters. So for a team that had 11 draft picks in 2025, they didn't spend a pick on a linebacker until the 11th of those picks and in the 7th round. So felt like an unlikely scenario, but here we are. Both White and Landon Roberts, they've really kind of struggled to hold down starting jobs in recent years, but they are clearly like the top options on this defense right now, thanks to their experience in the league. White is the likely lone full-time linebacker as things stand right now, while Roberts is more likely to get taken off on those obvious passing situations. It's worth keeping in mind as far as expectations with White go. I know that he's been an LB1 before, but that was years ago at this point, and he has not been a very efficient tackler for the majority of his NFL career. So expectations on what he can produce for IDP should be closer to that of like a low-end LB2 or LB3, but he is still worth rostering and likely starting in non-shallow formats. Those were the main IDPs that stood out to me that we can consider winners. I had some honorable mentions as well. that also, kind of mid NFL starters, but should get a decent opportunity in 2025, thanks to the team not doing anything to bring in a legitimate replacement. I'm thinking about guys like Marcus Davenport, edge defender for the Detroit Lions. They've been in the market for help opposite of Aiden Hutchinson for a few years now, and they continue to not really take these shots when they're available. They didn't draft an edge at all through the first 5 rounds until they took Ahmad Hassanein in round 6. So yeah, even coming off injury, there's a big opportunity here for Davenport, similar to last season. It'll just be up to him to do something with it, which, if history tells us anything, unlikely as that may be, but still worth a shot. So Tennessee Titans linebackers were another one. Cody Barton, after a nice contract in free agency, felt relatively safe here heading into the draft. But I think whoever ends up being the LB2, whether it's, Otis Reese or Cedric Gray right now, there's a decent opportunity here in Denard Wilson's defense, whoever emerges, right? It might be Otis Reese right now, just based on him starting over Gray last year for Wilson. But for all those Cedric Gray truthers out there, hope is alive at least. And then 3 safeties that stood out to me as well. Tony Adams of the New York Jets, Christian Izien of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Afatu Melifonwu of the Miami Dolphins. Outside of Antoine Winfield Jr. as like the one locked-in starter for Tampa, each of these teams felt really weak at the safety position, and they did not address that position specifically on day 1 or 2 of the NFL draft. And for Tampa, really thought they had a nice shot to give Winfield like a steady partner, but maybe they view Izien as that guy since Tyke Smith is going to man the slot. So Izien could be considered a winner. Miami as well. They lost Jordan Poyer and Javon Holland in free agency. They didn't draft a safety until round 5, which was Dante Trader. So Melifonwu and Ashton Davis, really both who have not been consistent starters in the NFL, are at least set up to be their top 2 guys right now. And then the Jets had Tony Adams and Andre Sisco. Pretty uninspiring, to be honest, but they at least added Malachi Moore in round 4, though don't think that's enough to push either guy out of a starting spot in 2025. So those are at least some kind of low cost value options at the position there that'll likely be free more often than not. Okay, that's enough of the positivity. Now it's time to look at some of the players who lost some IDP value coming out of the NFL draft because their teams did add high value rookies at their respective positions, starting with the Cleveland Browns linebacker core after they used the first pick of the second round on UCLA linebacker Carson Schlesinger, which is going to create obviously significant competition for snaps among himself, Devin Bush, Jerome Baker. Like those other 2 guys, they have experience in the NFL, but I think considering the investment in Schlesinger and the team being unlikely to compete for anything except for maybe the first overall pick in next year's draft, there's more incentive, I think, to get Schlesinger on the field and gain some experience because he comes out of college with just 19 total games under his belt. So the other factor is that there is this major injury concern with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who was the team's lead linebacker when healthy last year, but may not be ready or healthy enough to even play this season. So I worry a bit that the team's investment in Schlesinger could indicate more concern for Owusu-Koramoah than initially thought, leaving Jordan Hicks as the likely full-time starter for 2025 until either Schlesinger or Owusu-Koramoah are healthy/ready. So Jordan Hicks is in a fine spot to start still, but the rest of the Browns linebackers, because of the addition of Schlesinger, all lose value coming out of the draft, obviously. Another player, a bigger name this time, whose team invested highly in a potential starting rookie, Kayvon Thibodeau of the New York Giants. So the Giants invested the 3rd overall pick on Abdul Carter, the clear top edge rusher in this year's class, which no matter how you slice it, it doesn't bode well for Thibodeau and his potential path to snaps in 2025, who was also, not delivering on his top 5 potential himself so far. He did have the best season of his NFL career in 2024 with a 72.0 pass rush grade, but even that ranked outside the top 30 players at his position. So Carter's presence not only makes Thibodeau expendable if the team does wish to move on, but at the very least, it means that he wouldn't be getting the volume of snaps that basically kept him IDP relevant through the first 3 years of his career when he was averaging like at least 75% of the defensive snaps every season. So we can now expect those snap numbers to come down significantly, which is likely going to sink Thibodeau's production even further, especially if he continues to be average as a pass rusher. In Baltimore, not only did they add, they already have Kyle Hamilton as like a superstar safety in their secondary, but then they went and spent a first-round pick on Malachi Starks out of Georgia, which doesn't bode well for Ardarius Washington. So Washington took over a starting role for the Ravens last season after the team moved away from Marcus Williams and even Eddie Jackson, leading to some pretty usable IDP production when he was in that role. Washington really looked in line to start once again this season, but I think after spending a first round pick on the first safety drafted in this year's class, which was Malachi Starks, he now appears primed for that role kind of as a rookie. So Starks has experience as a starter at Georgia, specifically in that deep safety role that he'll likely be tasked with to start his NFL career. That role isn't necessarily like a high-end one for IDP, as like the non-Kyle Hamilton safety in Baltimore played 70% of the snaps from a deep alignment last season, but just getting on the field in a full-time capacity can still help him produce. Unfortunately for Washington, this level investment makes him kind of unlikely to see IDP relevant snaps this season as he makes his way for Starks to take over. So, and look, it's no guarantee that Starks starts in week one. We saw this with Kyle Hamilton his rookie year, but at the same time, all due respect to Ardarius Washington, he wasn't quite the NFL vet that Marcus Williams and Chuck Clark were at that time either. So not a true one-to-one comparison there. Okay, another one, Arnold Ebiketie of the Atlanta Falcons. They spent a second-round pick on this guy back in 2022. Heading into the NFL draft, Ebiketie looked to be the most promising Falcons edge rusher after leading the team's defensive line in sacks and pass rush grade last season. Now, to be fair, the Falcons, they always seemed destined to spend a first-round pick on a defensive lineman in this year's class. However, what did they do? They end up doubling up at the position, taking a hybrid linebacker / edge rusher, Jalen Walker, 15th overall, and then trading back into the first round to select one of the best pure pass rushers in this class in James Pierce Jr. So putting not one, but probably two nails in the coffin of Ebiketie's IDP potential. Ebiketie, he'll still get snaps as a rotational option, but one of the most needy teams or edge needy teams in the league, they're no longer in a position, I think, to rely on him in that volume heavy role that would have been best for his IDP potential. So unfortunately, while it was possible coming out of free agency, I think an IDP breakout season is no longer really in the cards for Ebiketie, barring his path to snaps getting much clearer, like via injury or something like that. Okay, last one, Kobe Bryant. No, obviously not that one. Safety for the Seattle Seahawks is who I'm referring to. Much like the previously mentioned Ardarius Washington, Bryant also kind of had his IDP value nuked with the team spending a high capital pick on Nick Emenwari as the second safety drafted in 2025. So Bryant also, like Washington, highlighted some IDP value in his 11 starts last season. He ended up finishing the year as like the overall safety 37, despite not becoming a starter until week 7 last year. So, the drafting of Emenwari, it isn't guaranteed to keep Bryant from a starting job come week 1. We saw this with Mike McDonald's usage of Kyle Hamilton again in his rookie year. However, like with Bryant, once again, like I mentioned with Washington, he doesn't necessarily have the experience or is necessarily on par with the likes of Chuck Clark and Marcus Williams, who were still starting ahead of Hamilton at that time. So this is also not the same situation because Emenwari is more likely and I think more capable to fill a box heavy safety role, supporting the team's run defense, potentially as a blitzer as well, similar to the aforementioned Hamilton, which is not really a part of Bryant's skill set at this point, and it is a key role in Mike McDonald's defense. So he's an early second round pick, a stronger scheme fit. Emenwari, to me, is the best bet to be the team's starter along with Julian Love in 2025. There are a few more honorable mentions here, looking at edge defenders Sam Williams and Marshawn Nealon of the Dallas Cowboys. So after losing DeMarcus Lawrence and Chauncey Golston this offseason, both Williams and Nealon might have had a really good shot to get a heavy workload in 2025, but then Dallas added Donovan Ezeraku in round 2. So there's all of a sudden kind of too many mouths to feed for snaps and points to a likely rotation this year. And then kind of similar with Dallas, Sam Hubbard retired in Cincinnati. So edges Miles Murphy and Joseph Osai. they could have had an opportunity here. Trey Hendrickson is wanting a new contract. So those guys could have been set up for big time roles this year, but the team adds Shamar Stewart in round 1. And as much as I don't love Stewart for IDP as a rookie, that's enough of an investment there to kind of muddy the waters that, outside of Trey Hendrickson, I wouldn't love the Bengals edges right now. And then lastly, Jeremiah Trotter of the Philadelphia Eagles, linebacker there. I think he had a good shot to get some starting snaps if Nakobe Dean wasn't going to be back to start this year, which seemed likely. But then they drafted Jihad Campbell in the first round. They added Smail Mondin on day 3, obviously re-signed Zach Bond this offseason as well. So they went from almost having nothing to, like no available linebackers by the end of the year. So kind of a full barn here, which just hurts Trotter's chances of really doing anything here in year 2 for him. Thank you all for watching. If you'd be so kind to like and subscribe, as always, I'd greatly appreciate that. We'll have plenty more fantasy offseason content in the channel still to come, including IDP for my fellow defense degens. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, peace out.